It had been raining for hours. That kind of slow, steady drizzle that clings to your clothes and chills your skin no matter how fast you walk. Caleb Turner tightened his old coat as he stepped off the late bus, his boots sinking slightly into a shallow puddle at the curb. It was past 10. The streets were nearly empty, lit only by the soft flicker of street lamps and a few tired neon signs. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another tired man on his way home from a long shift. But Caleb wasn't thinking about himself. His mind was on Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, and whether she remembered to plug in the little heater before going to bed. Their apartment always felt colder after it rained. He passed the bakery on 6th Street, the one that always smelled like cinnamon in the mornings. Its windows were dark now, fogged from the inside. Just ahead was the old pharmacy, still lit up but closed for the night. He turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, steps slowing as he caught sight of something strange at the bus stop bench. A woman was sitting there, slumped awkwardly, one shoe missing and her umbrella tipped sideways on the wet pavement. At first glance he thought maybe she was just tired, maybe waiting for the bus. But something didn't sit right. Caleb paused, looked around. No one else was nearby. He took a careful step closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, you all right?" No answer. Her head hung low, her breathing barely there. Without thinking, Caleb crouched down beside her. Years of working alone in dark school hallways had taught him how to stay calm when things didn't look good. He checked for a pulse. Faint, but there. Her skin was cold. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Then, without hesitation, he slipped off his coat and draped it gently over her shoulders. Rain continued to fall, soaking into the back of his shirt as he knelt there, whispering words of reassurance she probably couldn't hear. He stayed until the paramedics arrived, still quiet, steady. And when they lifted her onto the stretcher and loaded her into the ambulance, Caleb didn't wait for a thank you. He didn't ask who she was, didn't even give his name. He just nodded to the EMTs, tucked his hands into his pockets and kept walking into the rain, boots heavy, heart light. He had no idea that the woman he just saved wasn't just anyone, and that a quiet act of kindness on a rainy night would echo louder than he ever imagined. The first thing Margaret Langley noticed was the ceiling. It was white, too white, with one of those dull, square fluorescent panels buzzing softly in the corner. The kind you only see in hospitals or sad offices. She blinked slowly. Her chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around it. Her mouth was dry. When she tried to sit up, a nurse gently eased her back down. "You're in the hospital," the nurse said softly. "You collapsed last night, but you're going to be okay." Collapsed? Margaret's mind raced, trying to remember. The last thing she could recall was walking up Maple Avenue, heading to the hotel her assistant had booked. She'd refused the private car. Insisted on walking. Something about the cool night air felt grounding, familiar, and then nothing, just black. She turned her head slightly. A small plastic cup of water sat on the tray beside her. Her handbag was on the windowsill, soaked and sagging, and next to it, folded neatly, was a men's coat, old, worn, still damp. That wasn't hers. She looked back at the nurse. Who brought me here?" The nurse smiled. "A man found you. Stayed with you until the ambulance arrived. No name, just left after making sure you were breathing." Margaret stared at the coat. She didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of woman, not anymore. But something in her chest cracked open. The quiet kind of break that doesn't show on the outside, but rearranges everything inside. Later that afternoon, her assistant Chloe arrived, flustered and pale. "Why didn't you call someone? Why were you out alone? Do you have any idea?" Margaret held up a hand, silencing her. "I need a favour," she said, voice calm but firm. "Find him." Chloe blinked. "Find who?" "The man who found me," she replied, looking down at the coat resting in her lap. "He didn't leave his name, but he left this." She ran her fingers gently across the frayed collar, the stitching that had been hand-mended more than once. Whoever this man was, he didn't have much, but he gave it anyway. "I want to thank him, properly." Chloe hesitated. "Margaret, you have board meetings next week. You've got the gala." "I almost died on a bench in the rain," Margaret said, eyes steady. And the only person who noticed was someone who had no reason to. There was a silence between them. Then Chloe nodded, quietly pulling out her phone. That night, long after the nurses had dimmed the lights, Margaret sat awake in her hospital bed, holding the coat like a blanket. She didn't know his name, didn't know his face, But she remembered the feeling, the stillness in the storm, the warmth of a stranger's presence. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. It had been 4 days since the night Caleb knelt in the rain beside the woman on the bench. Life went on, the way it always does. The boiler at school kept acting up. Lily lost her science project folder and swore she left it right on the kitchen table. And Caleb had to spend part of his Saturday unclogging the sink, again. He didn't think much about what happened that night, not because he didn't care, but because, well, he just didn't expect it to matter to anyone else. He'd done what any decent person would do. That's what he told himself anyway. So when someone knocked on his apartment door that Sunday afternoon, he wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Maybe the super. Or Mrs. Kinley from downstairs. Her Wi-Fi went out at least once a week, and she always needed help resetting the router. But when he opened the door, he froze. Standing there, in a pressed coat, with carefully styled silver blonde hair and a quiet steadiness in her eyes, was the woman from the bench, Margaret. She looked healthier, but still pale. A cane rested lightly in her left hand, though she didn't lean on it much. Her right hand held a small paper bag and a folded letter. Caleb stared for a second too long before stepping aside. "Come in, please." Margaret smiled faintly. "Only for a minute, I promise." The apartment was small but tidy. A few drawings were taped to the fridge. A pair of little sneakers sat by the door, and the scent of something sweet, maybe banana bread, hung faintly in the air. Margaret didn't comment on any of it. She simply turned to face him, holding out the envelope. "I didn't know your name," she said, "but I remembered your coat, and the way you stayed." Caleb scratched the back of his neck, awkward. I saw someone who needed help." Margaret nodded. "And you gave it, without asking for anything, not even a name." There was a silence, not uncomfortable, just full. She offered the bag next. "It's cranberry scones, homemade, not as good as my mother's, but better than hospital food." Caleb smiled. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said gently, "but I wanted to." They sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of lukewarm coffee between them. Margaret asked about his work. He asked how she was feeling. She didn't mention her wealth, her title, or the staff who tried to stop her from coming alone. He didn't mention how tight money had been lately, or the notice from the landlord about rent going up again. It wasn't that those things didn't matter. It's just that, for a few minutes, they didn't define either of them. When she finally stood to leave, Margaret rested a hand lightly on the back of the chair. "That night," she said softly, "was one of the most important nights of my life. Not because I almost died, but because someone reminded me I was still human." Caleb looked down, unsure how to respond. But Margaret didn't wait for an answer. She simply smiled again, turned toward the door, and left as quietly as she'd arrived. And when Caleb opened the letter later that night, he didn't expect the words to hit so deep. It wasn't long or dramatic, just a thank you written in blue ink with careful hands. But there was a line at the bottom, one that stayed with him. "You didn't just save my life, you reminded me what it feels like to be seen." 3 days passed since Margaret visited. Caleb hadn't told anyone about it, not even Lily. He wasn't sure how to explain that the woman he'd helped, the stranger on the bench, had shown up at their apartment with scones, handwritten gratitude, and a calmness that somehow filled the room without ever raising her voice. He still had the letter, folded and tucked in the back of his wallet like something fragile and important. It was Thursday morning when the second envelope arrived. Not handwritten this time, typed, clean, official looking, tucked under the apartment door with his name on it, Caleb Turner, in bold. He stared at it for a moment, then opened it. Inside was a short note and a folded brochure. "Dear Caleb, I hope you'll consider stopping by our community centre on Saturday. It's small, a little chaotic, but filled with people who care. We're looking for someone to help manage the place, keep things running, keep people safe. No resume needed, just integrity, and someone who knows how to fix a broken heater when it matters. I think you might be that person." Gratefully, Caleb sat down at this kitchen table, holding the letter like it might float away if he let go. He'd never worked in a community centre, never managed anyone. His whole adult life had been spent fixing things quietly, behind the scenes. Janitor, handyman, night shift repair guy. No one ever asked him to lead anything. No one had ever looked at him the way Margaret had, like he was already capable. Later that night, he stood by the sink, rinsing dishes while Lily coloured at the table. "Dad," she said without looking up, "did someone named Margaret bring us cookies?" He blinked. "What?" "I found crumbs in this paper bag on the counter," she said, "and it smelled like cranberry and cinnamon." Caleb chuckled. "They were scones! Were they from that fancy bakery?" "No," he said softly, "they were homemade." Lily nodded, then went back to her drawing. "You should let her come over again. She made the apartment feel nice." He didn't answer right away. But later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Caleb stood alone in the hallway, staring at the brochure Margaret had left. The cover read Langley Centre, a place to start over. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered what starting over might actually look like. If someone believed he could. The Langley Centre was tucked between a laundromat and an old church that hadn't rung its bell in years. No big sign, no grand entryway, just a simple brick building with chipping paint and a front door that stuck a little when you pulled. Caleb stood out front for a full minute before going in. He wasn't dressed fancy, just his usual jeans, boots and a clean flannel shirt. He'd shaved that morning, which Lily had noticed right away. "You look nervous," she said, peeking at him over her cereal bowl. "I'm not," he lied. Inside, the place felt warm. Not warm, like a thermostat set too high. Warm like people. A little messy maybe, but alive. There were bulletin boards filled with hand-drawn flyers. A bookshelf leaned sideways under the weight of too many donated novels. The floors creaked, the walls needed repainting, and something in the air smelled like lentil soup and cinnamon. He hadn't even made it 10 steps in when a voice called out, "You must be Caleb." He turned. Margaret stood at the end of the hall, leaning lightly on her cane, smiling like she'd been waiting all day just to say that. "I didn't expect a welcome party," he said, half grinning. "No party," she replied. "Just me, but I do make a mean cup of tea." They sat in her office, which wasn't really an office at all. Just a small room with mismatched chairs, a dented filing cabinet and a desk covered in post-it notes. Margaret poured tea from a chipped blue pot. "I want to be honest with you," she began. "This place is held together by hope, duct tape, and the kindness of people who show up even when they're tired." Caleb nodded slowly. "You wouldn't be managing staff or budgets," she added. "You'd be keeping the building safe, helping people find their way, fixing things that break, listening when no one else does." "That last one sounds harder," he muttered. Margaret smiled. "It is, but I think you're already good at it." He looked down at this cup in his hands, feeling the heat rise into his fingers. "I'm just a guy with a wrench," he said. "Not sure I'm what this place needs." "No," Margaret said gently. "You're a guy who didn't walk past, that's the difference." After the tour, which included a leaky roof, a broken faucet in the kids' bathroom, and a food pantry that needed reorganising, Margaret walked him out to the front steps. "I'm not asking for an answer today," she said. "I just wanted you to see it." Caleb glanced back at the building, crooked, cluttered, full of life. "I'll think about it," he said. Margaret nodded. "That's all I hoped for." That night, back home, Lily was finishing her homework at the kitchen table. Caleb sat across from her, still wearing the same flannel shirt, the brochure now dog-eared in his back pocket. "Did you like it?" Lily asked. He didn't answer right away. Then after a pause he said, "It felt like the kind of place where things break a lot." Lily looked up, confused. "That's bad, right?" He smiled. "No, that's how you know people actually use it." It was a quiet Saturday. Rain had been in the forecast all week, but the sun decided to show up instead, low and soft, like it was sneaking in through the back door. Caleb was in the kitchen, elbows deep in dish soap and warm water, when someone knocked. Not a loud knock, just 2 gentle taps, the kind you give when you're not sure if you're expected. Lily beat him to the door. "Hi," she chirped. "You're back." Caleb came around the corner just in time to see Margaret standing there, holding a pie dish with both hands and looking a little unsure of herself. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I made apple pie, and I wanted to return your letter. It's been sitting on my desk all week." Caleb smiled, surprised. "You didn't have to bake for us." "I didn't," she said. "I wanted to." They cleared a spot on the coffee table and shared the pie in mismatched bowls. No whipped cream, no fancy forks, just warm slices and soft conversation. Lily asked Margaret if she had a dog. Margaret said no, but she once had a goldfish named Frank who lived for 8 years. 8? Lily gasped. "That's like forever for a fish." Margaret laughed. "I think he was just too stubborn to die." They talked about books and cartoons, about the leaky faucet at the community centre, and about how Lily wanted to be an artist when she grew up. Or maybe a detective, or both. "You can be both," Margaret said, sipping her tea. Detectives notice details, artists do too. As the sun dipped low outside the window, Caleb stood by the sink again, rinsing dishes without really thinking. He watched Margaret from the corner of his eye, the way she leaned forward to listen when Lily spoke, how she smiled softly but never too big, like she was still learning how to let joy sit comfortably on her face. He didn't know everything about her. He didn't know where she came from, or what her life had looked like before the bench, before the coat, before the letter. But he knew this: she didn't feel like a guest anymore. She felt like someone who belonged in that space, even if just for an afternoon. When Margaret stood to leave, Lily hugged her without asking. A simple, fast squeeze around the waist, like she'd done it 100 times before. Margaret froze, just for a second, then she placed a hand on Lily's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the wind had picked up. The sun had dipped low enough to leave long shadows on the sidewalk. Caleb walked her to the door, pie dish tucked under her arm. "You didn't come today to talk about the job, did you?" he asked. Margaret shook her head. "No, I just wanted to see you both again." There was a pause. Neither of them moved. Then she added quietly, "You and Lily, remind me that life doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful." Caleb looked down, nodded once, then opened the door for her. No big moment, no music swell. Just two people standing in a doorway, not quite strangers anymore. Caleb didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't that he was worried exactly, more like unsettled. His mind kept circling the same thought. What if I'm not enough for this? He stared at the ceiling, one arm behind his head, the other resting across his chest, like he was trying to keep his doubts from slipping out. The job at the centre was still open. Margaret hadn't pushed, she never did. But every word she'd spoken lingered in his head like echo. "You didn't walk past. You already know how to listen. You and Lily. You remind me what matters." The next morning, Lily left for school in a rush, forgetting her lunch but remembering to feed the goldfish. Caleb stayed behind. He had the day off. He moved around the apartment without really doing anything, folded a towel that was already folded, wiped the counter twice. Then he opened the fridge and froze. There, stuck between a magnet shaped like a strawberry and a photo of Lily in her Halloween pirate costume, was a sheet of wide-ruled paper. At the top, written in blue marker, were the words, "10 reasons why Dad should take the job." Each bullet point was written in crooked kid handwriting, with tiny smiley faces drawn in the margins. "The place needs fixing and you fix stuff? They have a snack cabinet," Margaret said so. "You'll be home more. No night shifts, more sleep is nicer, Dad." "Margaret likes you," she brought pie. "You like her too, I can tell. They don't care if you wear work boots. The roof leaks and you know what to do. You're already helping. You're enough even if you don't think so." Caleb didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He just stood there staring at that last line. Later that afternoon he walked to the cemetery. It was something he hadn't done in a while, not because he'd forgotten, but because some kinds of pain don't like to be visited too often. He sat on the bench near her stone. The wind rustled through the bare branches above him. He didn't say much at first, just sat there quiet. Then softly, "I don't know if I can do this, Em." A pause. "I mean, I can. Physically, I can fix the toilets, patch drywall, talk to the volunteers. But this feels bigger. It feels like more than what I am. Another pause, a longer one. Then he took a deep breath. "But Lily, she believes I can. And Margaret, she sees something I don't always see in myself. I think maybe you would have seen it too." His voice broke a little, but he kept going. "So, I'm gonna try, not just for them, for me, for you." He stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans. "And if I mess it up," he said with a faint smile, "you're not allowed to haunt me." That evening he called Margaret. She picked up on the second ring. "I'll take the job," Caleb said, "but I want to earn it. No special treatment." There was a pause on her end, then, "Fair enough. I wouldn't offer it if I didn't think you'd earn every bit of it." The next day, Caleb showed up at the Langley Centre wearing the same boots he wore the night he found her. But this time, he didn't feel like just a guy walking home in the rain. He felt like someone stepping into something that finally made sense. The first week at the Langley Centre was messy. The copier jammed, the basement flooded. A kid named Travis broke the doorknob to the supply closet, then cried because he thought he'd be fired, even though he was just a volunteer. Caleb fixed the copier, cleared the drain, and gave Travis a high five instead of a lecture. He didn't wear a name badge, didn't need one. People remembered him for the way he showed up, not loud, not flashy, just solid, steady, kind. Margaret wasn't around much that week. Caleb figured she was just busy with meetings or trying to give him space to settle in. But when Friday rolled around and she still hadn't come by, he asked Chloe, her assistant, if everything was okay. Chloe hesitated, shifted her clipboard from one arm to the other. "She's resting," she said. "Doctor's orders." "Is it her heart?" Caleb asked quietly. Chloe nodded. She pushed herself too hard, again. That night, Caleb stopped by the hospital. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a paperback novel from the centre's lost and found bin. Something about an old woman who travels the world with a pet parrot and a secret inheritance. He wasn't sure she'd even be awake, but when he stepped into the room, there she was. Sitting up in bed, hair pulled back, IV taped to her arm, pretending to read a magazine she hadn't turned the page on in 20 minutes. Margaret looked up, blinked, then smiled, tired but real. "You're supposed to be off the clock," she said. Caleb shrugged. "This isn't about the job." He sat in the chair beside her bed and placed the book on the tray. "It's probably terrible," he said, "but I figured it'd make you laugh." She glanced at the cover, chuckled softly. "I'll take my chances." There was a long stretch of quiet after that. The kind of silence that doesn't feel awkward, just full of things that don't need to be said. Then Margaret spoke, voice low. "I hate this part." Caleb glanced at her. "The hospital?" "No," she said, being vulnerable. She stared at the ceiling for a second before continuing. "I spent most of my life building things. Companies, programs, walls. I thought if I just kept moving, I'd outrun the fear. The loneliness, the idea that someday someone might have to take care of me." She looked at him. "And then you did." Caleb didn't say anything right away, just sat with it. Let the weight of her honesty settle between them. Then softly he said, "You didn't need taking care of, you needed someone who didn't look away." Before he left, she reached for the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a small velvet box. "Don't open this yet," she said. "Just hold on to it." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Is this what I think it is?" "It's not a proposal," she smirked. "It's a symbol of what we're building, whatever this is." He took the box, didn't open it, didn't need to. Then he said something he hadn't said in years, something that surprised even him. "I'm not going anywhere." And for once, Margaret let herself believe that might actually be true. The night before her surgery, the hospital room felt quieter than usual. No beeping, no nurses rushing past, just the steady hum of machines and the soft flicker of the overhead light. Margaret sat by the window, her robe tied loose, one hand resting in her lap, the other cradling a cup of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched. Outside, the city looked small, lights blinking like tired eyes. She hated feeling fragile, hated the tubes, the gowns, the way her body betrayed her when her mind was still sharp and stubborn. But tonight she wasn't alone. Caleb sat in the chair beside her bed, legs crossed at the ankle, flipping through a worn paperback, the same one he'd brought last week. He didn't say much, didn't need to. He was just there. Lily had fallen asleep, curled up on the little couch by the wall, a fleece blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon. Her sketchbook was still open, half a drawing unfinished. A woman in a hospital bed smiling, with two people on either side of her. Margaret noticed it, smiled quietly. "She sees the world so clearly," she whispered. Caleb looked up. "She gets that from her mom." Margaret turned toward him, her voice soft. "Do you still talk to her, your wife?" He nodded once. "Most days." "And what would she say about all this?" Caleb smiled faintly. "She'd say I took too long to shave, and that Lily's the best part of me." There was a pause. Then Margaret said, almost to herself, "I'm scared." It came out smaller than she intended. Not a dramatic confession, just a truth she could no longer hold inside. Caleb didn't flinch. He reached across and took her hand. Warm, steady, calloused from years of fixing things no one else wanted to deal with. "I'd be worried if you weren't," he said, "but you're not doing this alone." They sat like that for a while, her hand in his, Lily breathing softly in the background. The room held together by something invisible but strong. Then Margaret reached toward the nightstand and pulled out the velvet box. "I told you not to open it," she said with a half smile. "But I changed my mind." Caleb hesitated, then opened it. Inside wasn't jewellery. It was a key. "To what?" he asked quietly. "To my home," she said. "My real home. Not the one with security gates and glass elevators. The old place. The one no one's been in for years. I want you and Lily to see it, someday." Caleb looked at her, his voice low. "Why us?" Margaret didn't blink. "Because you brought me back to life before the doctors did." Later, as nurses came to prep her for the next morning, Caleb kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "We'll be here when you wake up." And as he tucked Lily in tighter on the little hospital couch, he whispered something else. Not for Margaret, not even for Lily, but for himself. This isn't the end of something, it's the start. The surgery took 6 hours. Caleb paced the hallway the entire time, back and forth, hands in his pockets, then out again, then in. Lily sat quietly on the bench near the window, her sketchbook in her lap, though she hadn't drawn a thing, just kept flipping the same 3 pages over and over. No one said much. The nurse who finally came out didn't smile big or make any announcements. She just looked at Caleb and said gently, "She made it through, she's in recovery, it went well." And just like that, the world seemed to breathe again. Margaret's recovery was slow but steady. Caleb visited every day, sometimes with soup, sometimes with Lily, sometimes with silence. They didn't rush anything, there was no need, there was time now. One afternoon, as spring began to loosen winter's grip, Margaret sat on the hospital patio with Lily, both of them wrapped in 2 big sweaters and sipping juice from paper cups. Caleb watched them from inside, one hand resting on the window frame, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't know what to call this, whatever was happening between the 3 of them. It wasn't just friendship, it wasn't just gratitude. It was home in its softest form. A month later, Margaret stood in her old house for the first time in years. It was smaller than she remembered, dusty in places, quiet. But when she stepped through the doorway with Caleb and Lily behind her, something shifted. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. They spent the afternoon cleaning, rearranging old books, laughing over photo albums. Caleb fixed a broken cabinet door. Lily found a box of cassette tapes and asked what this weird music was. That night they stayed for dinner. Pizza on paper plates, a candle in the middle of the table, not because it was fancy, just because it made things feel warm. Before they left, Lily stood on tiptoe and whispered to Margaret, "If you ever feel scared again, you can sleep with my blanket, it smells like pancakes." Margaret knelt down and hugged her tight. "Thank you," she said, voice thick, "but I think I'm already wrapped in something even better." The following weekend, they had a small gathering in the backyard. Nothing big, just a few folding chairs, some iced tea, and the kind of peace that doesn't need a reason. At some point, Lily stood up and gave a toast. The kind only a kid can give, full of mismatched ideas and feelings too big for her hands. My dad saved Margaret, but she saved us too, because love doesn't run out, it grows. No one corrected her grammar, no one needed to. Caleb glanced at Margaret. She looked back. Neither of them said a word, but they didn't have to. As the sun set behind the fence, casting long golden lines across the yard, Caleb stepped into the house and turned on one light in the hallway. Just one, enough to guide the way back in case anyone ever needed it. Because sometimes home isn't a place you build. It's a feeling you keep lit, just in case someone you love is still finding their way back. What I love most about this story is how real it feels. No drama, no one playing the hero, just a good man, a woman who's strong but tired, and a little girl wise enough to quietly bring them together. Everything unfolds slowly, gently, but it hits deep. There's no loud confession, no fairy tale ending, just a hallway light left on, so someone knows they're still being waited for. And honestly, to me, that's more than enough. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you luck, peace, and success in everything you do. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more. Take care, and I'll see you next time, right here on Rain Inside.